is in fact a victim here. She herself is a victim of her ex-boyfriend.
Sometimes the most terrifying stories don't begin with sirens, arrests, or screams for help. They begin quietly, inside ordinary homes, behind professional titles, and beneath lives that appear completely normal. Imagine trusting someone whose entire career is built on keeping people safe. Someone trained to guide patients into unconsciousness, to control pain, memory, and awareness with absolute precision. Now imagine that same knowledge being questioned, not in an operating room, but in a criminal investigation. This is not just another crime story. This is a case that left seasoned investigators silent, prosecutors shaken, and an entire community struggling to understand how something so disturbing could happen without anyone noticing sooner. At the center of it all is a woman described as a caring mother and a highly trained medical professional. A nurse anesthetist, someone whose job is to put people under anesthesia so surgeries can be performed safely. And yet, today, her name is tied to allegations so disturbing that even those who prosecute child abuse cases for a living say they are difficult to process. What began as an online tip turned into a raid, which then became an investigation, and finally unfolded into one of the most horrifying accusations imaginable, involving a child too young to fully understand what was happening to her. As the evidence surfaced, one question began to loom larger than all the others. Was her professional knowledge used to make a child forget? Because if that question is answered with yes, then this case isn't just about abuse. It's about the weaponization of trust, medicine, and silence. And the truth, still unfolding in an Ohio courtroom, is far darker than anyone initially believed. When investigators first arrived at the home in Warren County, Ohio, they weren't expecting what they would eventually uncover. At that stage, the case appeared disturbing, but limited. A tip from Google had flagged possible child sexual abuse material connected to an IP address. Those tips are not rare. Law enforcement agencies receive hundreds, sometimes thousands of them every month. Most involve possession or online distribution. Horrific, but often disconnected from an immediate, identifiable child in danger. That was the assumption here too. So when detectives executed the search warrant in the early morning hours of December 23, 2025, their primary focus was digital evidence. Phones, computers, storage devices, anything that could confirm what had been flagged months earlier. Inside the home, Tony McCollister was detained first. A man whose name meant little to most people, except for one strange footnote in pop culture. Years earlier, he had appeared briefly on a short-lived reality television show centered on unconventional relationships. That detail alone was unsettling, but not criminal. What mattered now was what investigators believed he might be hiding. His girlfriend, Erica Grove, was also detained. At that moment, officers did not view her as the primary suspect. In fact, body camera footage suggests they saw her as cooperative, calm, and relatively transparent. She answered questions. She helped manage pets inside the home. She showed no signs of panic or resistance. To the officers on scene, she didn't look like a monster. But monsters rarely do. As deputies moved through the house, they noticed dogs, several of them. That detail mattered, because investigators already had reason to believe the case involved sexual conduct with animals. Even then, that alone placed the situation among the most disturbing many of them had ever encountered. Still, the focus remained narrow. That would not last. When digital evidence was reviewed in the days and weeks that followed, the case began to unravel in ways no one anticipated. What investigators found went far beyond possession, far beyond animals, and far beyond anything that could be dismissed as a single individual acting alone. Video files, images, patterns. And then, something that changed everything. Evidence pointing to a child. A real child. Not a face in an anonymous image online, but a child connected directly to the people under investigation. She was under 6 years old. That discovery forced investigators to confront a terrifying possibility. This was no longer just a digital crime. This was a crime happening in the real world, behind closed doors, to someone who could not protect herself, and might not even fully remember what had been done to her. As the investigation expanded, so did the scope of the charges. By the time the case reached a grand jury, the narrative had completely shifted. Erica Grove, once considered a secondary figure, was now facing 24 felony charges. Among them, multiple counts of rape, corrupting another with drugs, gross sexual imposition, child endangerment, and sexual conduct with animals. The child at the center of the most serious allegations was younger than 6, and one detail made those charges even more chilling. Erica Grove wasn't just anyone. She was trained to render people unconscious. During the search, a detective made casual conversation with her, the kind officers often use to pass time while paperwork is processed. He asked about her profession. She told him she was a nurse, specifically a nurse anesthetist. The detective followed up, half joking, half curious. "So that means you put people under, right?" Her answer was calm, professional, almost instructional. She explained how anesthesia works, how patients often have no memory of the procedure at all, how the brain shuts off awareness, how waking up can look very different depending on age and physiology. At the time, it sounded like small talk. Later, it sounded like a warning no one realized they were hearing. Because as prosecutors began piecing together the evidence, one disturbing theory emerged. Was that medical knowledge used to drug a child? Nothing about that question is simple. Anesthesia drugs are highly regulated. Hospitals track them closely. Every dose is logged, every vial is accounted for, at least on paper. But prosecutors know something else too. No system is perfect. If even a small amount of medication went missing, it might not raise alarms immediately. And if someone understood dosages, effects, and detection thresholds better than the average person, that knowledge could be exploited. That possibility alone elevated the case into a category few ever reach. When Erica Grove was arrested on January 30th, she was booked into jail on all 24 charges. She appeared in court shortly after, entering a plea of not guilty. Prosecutors requested a high bond, citing concern not only for the public, but specifically for the child victim named in the indictment. They asked for electronic monitoring, house arrest, and strict no-contact orders involving minors and animals. Then came a moment that stunned the courtroom. Erica Grove's attorney claimed she was not the predator, but a victim. According to the defense, she had been coerced by her ex-boyfriend, manipulated, controlled, forced into actions she never would have committed on her own. Her lawyer went even further, claiming that investigators had told her parents she was pressured into participating, and that she had passed a polygraph denying sexual abuse of the child. But prosecutors weren't persuaded. The evidence, they said, told a very different story. One in which Erica Grove was not on the periphery, but up to her eyeballs, as one prosecutor later described it. The bond was ultimately set at $250,000, with electronic monitoring. Tony McCollister's charges were even more extensive, 30 counts, including rape, pandering sexually oriented material involving a minor, and child endangerment. He too received a $250,000 bond. But bond hearings don't answer the most important question. They only delay it. And that question remains. How long had this been happening? And how much more was still hidden? As prosecutors began laying out the scope of the allegations, the case crossed into territory that even veteran investigators described as overwhelming. This was no longer a situation where illegal material had been discovered incidentally. According to court filings and statements from law enforcement, what emerged was a pattern, one that suggested repeated acts, preparation, and escalation. At the center of that pattern was a child who, by every legal and moral standard, was defenseless. The most disturbing aspect was not just what investigators believe happened, but how it may have been carried out. Authorities allege that the child was drugged before the abuse occurred. That detail alone dramatically changes the nature of the case. Drugging removes resistance. It removes memory. And in the context of a child, it removes the ability to even articulate what is wrong. That allegation forced prosecutors to look closely at Erica Grove's background, not as a character detail, but as a possible mechanism. A nurse anesthetist is not a general nurse. It is one of the most specialized roles in modern medicine. These professionals are trained extensively in pharmacology, dosage control, patient monitoring, and the precise balance between unconsciousness and safety. They understand how long a drug takes to work, how long it lasts, how it exits the body, and, crucially, how memory can be affected or erased. Prosecutors have not yet publicly stated exactly which substances they believe were used, or how they were obtained. But experts familiar with the field note that while anesthesia drugs are tightly regulated, access alone creates opportunity. Hospitals rely on systems, and systems rely on people. And people, investigators know, sometimes exploit gaps. Even the suggestion that such knowledge may have been used against a child is enough to send shockwaves through a courtroom. It reframes the alleged crime as not only abuse, but calculated abuse. That reframing became clear during Erica Grove's bond hearing. The prosecution emphasized the vulnerability of the alleged victim. They argued that release posed a danger, not hypothetically, but specifically. Their request included electronic monitoring, strict house arrest, and absolute no-contact orders with minors and animals. The defense responded with a narrative that stood in sharp contrast. According to Erica Grove's attorney, she was not acting independently. She was allegedly manipulated and coerced by her ex-boyfriend, Tony McCollister. The attorney suggested a power imbalance, one in which Grove was pressured into participating and later made a scapegoat as the investigation intensified. The claim that she passed a polygraph denying sexual abuse of the child was presented as proof of innocence. But polygraphs are not evidence. They are tools, imperfect ones. And prosecutors were not moved. What troubled them most was not just the existence of abuse material, but the escalation uncovered during the investigation. According to Warren County Prosecutor David Faunshell, detectives initially believed the most horrific aspect of the case involved animals. That belief changed dramatically once deeper analysis of the digital evidence was completed. At that point, the room reportedly went silent. Investigators who handled child sexual abuse cases daily were struggling to process what they were seeing, not because it was unfamiliar, but because of its severity. Sexual abuse cases involving very young children carry some of the harshest penalties under Ohio law. Rape of a child under 10 can result in life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. And in this case, prosecutors say, the charges are numerous enough that even without the most severe count, the sentence exposure reaches decades. Tony McCollister's role in the case is no less central. He faces 30 felony charges, including rape, child endangerment, and pandering sexually oriented material involving a minor. Prosecutors allege he was directly involved in the abuse and in the creation or possession of illegal material. His defense attorney argued for leniency at his bond hearing, pointing to his lack of a serious criminal record and his ties to the community. The court was not persuaded. Bond for both defendants was set at $250,000, with only 10% required for release, along with electronic monitoring and strict conditions. But the legal process raises another question that continues to haunt this case. Why did it take so long? The initial tip from Google was submitted in June of 2025. The search warrant was not executed until December, roughly 6 months later. To the public, that delay can feel alarming, especially when a child is ultimately discovered to be at the center of the case. Prosecutors and experts explain that the delay is not unusual. Law enforcement agencies receive massive volumes of tips related to child sexual abuse material every single day. Each tip must be reviewed, verified, prioritized, and then developed into probable cause sufficient for a judge to sign a search warrant. Most tips involve people trading or possessing material online, crimes that are horrific, but do not immediately indicate a child is in direct danger. When investigators do believe a child is actively at risk, those cases are fast-tracked. In this situation, authorities say they did not know a child was involved until after the search warrant was executed and the devices were examined. By then, the case had already taken a far darker turn than anyone expected. The child, now living with her father, is reportedly receiving care and support. Details are being closely guarded, as they should be. What remains is a legal battle that will likely to resolve. A battle over evidence, over intent, over coercion versus responsibility. And hovering over all of it is a question that cannot be undone. When someone trained to erase pain and memory is accused of doing the opposite, how do you measure the damage? As the legal process moved forward, one reality became increasingly clear. This case would not be decided by testimony alone. It would be decided by data. In modern child exploitation investigations, digital evidence is often the strongest, and most unforgiving, witness. Devices do not forget, files do not misremember, and metadata does not lie in the way people sometimes do. According to prosecutors and experts familiar with cases like this, the backbone of the investigation rests on a digital trail that is nearly impossible to erase completely. Every image uploaded, every video downloaded, every file accessed or stored. Each action leaves a trace. When illegal material is uploaded or shared online, it does not simply disappear into the void. Technology companies actively scan for known child sexual abuse material using digital fingerprints. When a match is detected, it triggers an automated report, one that includes timestamps, IP addresses, and account details. That is how this case began. What many people don't realize is that by the time law enforcement arrives at a suspect's door, the investigation is often already months, sometimes years, deep. Warrants are not executed on hunches. They are built on layers of verification. Once devices are seized, forensic analysts go to work. They don't just look at what is visible, they look at what was deleted, what was renamed, what was hidden, and what was accessed repeatedly. Even files that a user believes are gone can often be reconstructed. Deleted content leaves fragments. Temporary folders tell stories. Cache files quietly document behavior most users never think about. And when illegal material involves a minor, the scrutiny intensifies. Investigators look for consistency, patterns, timelines. They ask questions like, was this material downloaded once or repeatedly? Was it shared? Was it created? And most importantly, who appears in it? Experts following the case say that if prosecutors can prove that the defendants were not just in possession of material, but actively depicted in it, the defense options narrow dramatically. At that point, arguments about coercion, manipulation, or ignorance become far more difficult to sustain. This is why prosecutors have spoken with such gravity. One Ohio-based prosecutor, not affiliated with the case, described charges like these as among the most serious short of murder. In his view, the potential sentences reflect not only the harm done, but the intent behind it. Rape of a child under 10 carries the possibility of life in prison without parole. And when combined with drugging allegations, the stakes rise even higher. Drugging introduces planning. It introduces preparation. It introduces awareness. It suggests that what happened was not impulsive, but deliberate. That distinction matters deeply in court. The defense, however, is expected to challenge that narrative aggressively. One likely strategy is separation. If the defendants turn on each other, prosecutors could face two competing stories, each pointing the finger at the other. This is common in multi-defendant cases, particularly when sentences are severe and cooperation might reduce exposure. Legal analysts expect both defense teams to explore plea negotiations, cooperation agreements, or testimonial deals. In cases like this, the race is often about who speaks first and who speaks most convincingly. But prosecutors are not relying on confessions. They are relying on evidence. Digital evidence does not negotiate, it does not forget details, and it does not soften over time. Another factor working against the defendants is escalation. According to investigators, this case did not remain static. What began as possession allegedly evolved into participation, and what initially appeared limited later revealed deeper involvement. That progression is significant. Courts often view escalation as proof of intent and comfort with criminal behavior. It suggests that boundaries were crossed repeatedly, not accidentally, but willingly. The defense's claim that Erica Grove was coerced will likely be tested against that timeline. Jurors may be asked to consider whether coercion explains not just one act, but many. Not just participation, but alleged leadership. Not just presence, but alleged use of specialized knowledge. And that brings the focus back to her profession. Medical expertise carries authority. It carries trust. And in this case, it carries troubling implications. If prosecutors can demonstrate that a child was sedated, impaired, or rendered unconscious using controlled substances, the narrative becomes almost impossible to neutralize. Because that would mean the alleged abuse was not only physical and sexual, but chemical. A crime designed to silence. Another issue likely to arise at trial is memory. Children this young may not be able to provide detailed accounts, and that absence can be deeply unsettling for jurors. But prosecutors will argue that the lack of memory is not a weakness. It is evidence. If drugging occurred, memory loss would be expected, and when combined with forensic findings, expert testimony, and digital records, the story does not depend on recollection alone. This is where technology becomes the silent narrator of the case. It fills gaps. It answers questions no one wants to ask aloud. And it forces accountability in ways that emotional testimony sometimes cannot. Meanwhile, the public continues to grapple with the same disbelief investigators felt early on. How does something like this happen without detection? Experts say the answer is uncomfortable. Because crimes like these often hide in plain sight. Behind stable careers. Behind relationships that appear ordinary. Behind people who know how to blend in. There is no single warning sign, no universal profile. And that is what makes cases like this so devastating. As the legal process continues, motions will be filed. Evidence will be challenged. Experts will testify. Jurors will be asked to absorb details that are difficult to hear and harder to forget. But no matter how the defense frames its arguments, the digital trail remains. And if prosecutors are right, that trail tells a story that does not change, even when the people involved do. As this case moves slowly through the court system, one truth has already settled heavily over everyone involved. Nothing about this story will ever feel resolved. No ruling, no sentence, no verdict can fully undo what has been alleged. Especially for a child so young that memory itself may have been taken from her, not by time, but by design. Inside the courtroom, the legal arguments will be technical. Motions will be filed. Evidence will be debated. Lawyers will argue over intent, coercion, access, and responsibility. But outside those walls, the case exists on a different level entirely. It exists as a warning, a reminder that danger does not always look dangerous, that harm does not always come from strangers, and that trust, especially professional trust, can be weaponized in ways that are almost impossible to imagine until it's too late. Prosecutors have made it clear that they view this case as one of the most serious they have ever encountered, not only because of the number of charges, but because of the nature of the alleged conduct. The combination of abuse, drugging, and exploitation places this case in a category few ever reach. If the allegations are proven, this was not chaos. It was control. Control over a child's body. Control over awareness. Control over memory. And control, prosecutors argue, is what separates a crime of impulse from a crime of calculation. The defense, of course, will push back. They will argue manipulation, coercion, shared blame. They will attempt to introduce doubt, not just about what happened, but about who truly drove it. That battle will likely define the trial. Two defendants, two stories, one body of evidence. And somewhere within that evidence lies the truth. Cold, unchanging, and indifferent to narrative. Digital files will be displayed. Timelines reconstructed. Experts will explain how technology tracks behavior, even when people believe they are unseen. Jurors will be asked to weigh facts that are deeply uncomfortable, and to do so without emotion, even though emotion is impossible to avoid. Meanwhile, the child at the center of it all is no longer part of the spectacle. Her name is protected, her location undisclosed. She is living with her father now, away from the place where prosecutors believe unimaginable harm occurred. That separation matters, because while this case will be discussed in headlines, courtrooms, and conversations online, her life will continue. Shaped by forces she never chose and may never fully remember. And that may be the most haunting element of all. This case forces us to confront questions we rarely want to ask. How well do we really know the people around us? How much trust do we place in titles, credentials, and appearances? And how often do we assume that this could never happen here? Investigators didn't expect this outcome. Prosecutors weren't prepared for the scale of what they uncovered. And the community is still trying to process how something so horrific could unfold quietly over time. As the trial approaches, more details will emerge. Some will clarify, others will disturb, and many will challenge assumptions we make about safety, authority, and oversight. But one thing is already clear. This is not just a story about crime. It is a story about silence, about access, about how power, when unchecked, can become a tool for unimaginable harm. And it is a story that deserves to be followed, not for shock value, but for accountability. Because cases like this don't just test the justice system, they test our willingness to look directly at uncomfortable truths and refuse to look away. If you believe stories like this matter, if you believe awareness is a form of protection, And if you believe silence only benefits those who exploit it, then take a moment to support this channel. Like this video to help push these stories into the light. Share it so others understand how easily trust can be abused. And subscribe if you want continued coverage that goes beyond headlines, into the details that truly matter. We'll keep following this case, we'll keep asking the hard questions, and we'll keep telling the stories others would rather ignore.